Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021. This is Rudranarayan Das, Executive Director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development. We are proud to announce that this conference is conducted along with Indian Institute of Management Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha Koraput, and Ravenshaw University Cuttack. I would like to welcome our speaker for today, one of the great institution maker, mentor and key advisor of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Professor B.P. Sanjaya, and participants across the globe through Facebook and YouTube Live, and who are here to listen Professor Sanjaya. The broader theme of this conference is ethnological context, disciplinary practices of social sciences, and policy frames. On behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, I extend my profound gratitude to Professor Mahadev Joyaswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, Professor Dr. Sarath Kumar Palita, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha, and Professor Dr. Sanjay Kumar Naik, respected Vice Chancellor, Ravenshaw University, Cuttack. The convener of this largest virtual conference, eminent Indian historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist, writer, and philanthropist, Mr. Charudat Panigrahi. The main outcome of this conference is to come up with a national and international framework for the education system in future. The crux of the conference will be the use of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality that is being increasingly adopted after the outbreak of COVID pandemic. We hope this conference could help students, faculties, researchers, and all to expand their mental horizon and help the education system to adopt the best. Dear friends, the Center for Adivasi Research and Development is a leading research-oriented institution promoting ethnographic, empirical, and evidence-based research on engaging and addressing the challenges that 21st century globe is facing today. Prime agenda of this institution is to come up with potential policy solutions for social change while believing in the agenda of 3D, debate, dialogue, and discussion, and with expertise, experiencing, and education, E3. The institution focuses on marginalized communities and work for their livelihood to protect the nature, culture, language, and identity in particular. The age of modernity has witnessed that change is the only constant phenomenon for the societal purpose to enhance knowledge. Our information work for them is methodological and avoid paradoxically framework which neglected so many centuries from theories to become practical. The Center for Adivasi Research and Development sincerely believe in the concept of social marketing, which is seriously looking for non-profit marketing and build new social entrepreneurship for check and balance mechanism to glorify generations to come. Center for Adivasi Research and Development come to serve with the holistic approach of critical thinking in education to fill the gaps, to plan accordingly for the voiceless communities. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, in this evening, we have with us one of the very important professor of communication, is a great institution maker and the founding vice chancellor of Central University of Tamil Nadu, Professor Dr. B.P. Sanjaya. Professor Sanjaya had his basic academic training in communication and journalism in Bangalore and obtained a PhD from Simon Fraser University, Canada. He taught at Madras University and MS University, Tirunelveli, before he moved to the University of Hyderabad as a professor in 1995. Professor Sanjay was involved in studying the historic satellite instructional television experiment SITE, and his professional expertise and interests are in the areas of political economy, of information and communication technologies, development communication, and international communication. He has been associated with various national and international bodies that chalk out policies on media education and research. He was the director of the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, Professor Sanjaya was the Pro Vice Chancellor of the university. He is the founding Vice Chancellor of the Central University of Tamil Nadu. And Professor BP Sanjaya today will deliver his talk on communication, research, and policy. Before inviting Professor Sanjay, I would like to invite Srijukta Charudat Panigraiji for an initial remark on the theme of today's topic. Over to you, Panigraiji.
Thank you, Rudra. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Professor Sanjay. Welcome. This is a very important evening for all of us, because the topic that you are going to talk to us about is probably one of the most important things that we face now, most crucial things that we face now, because there's no dearth of policies in India. India is probably one of the few countries in the world where we have policy for almost everything. However, the target audience, the target approach, the specificity of a policy, and obviously because of this, the impact of the policy is something we are all worried about, because many cases we see there are excellent policies, excellent policy briefs, formulations, but the targeting of these policies are skewed, are sometimes misdirected. And this is probably because there isn't much communication research that gets into this. So whether it's for external stakeholders or internal stakeholders, whether it is intra-departmental, interdepartmental, or it is meant for the public schemes or policies, there is always a slip between the cup and the lip, and that's more evident in lack of communication research-based policies. So your address today would be very important, because in this group, in this audience, you have a mix of policymakers, students, researchers, professionals. So all of us would go back after hearing you this evening more enlightened on how important is communication research for policy, and the other way around. So if a policy works well, probably that feeds into the communication research, and it's a cycle which shouldn't be broken, or shouldn't be somewhere not well maintained or well balanced, because at the end of the day, all the policies that we're talking about is for, or should be for, the benefit of the people. We are talking about one of the economies of the world where change is happening even more rapidly than we ever imagined, with so many things changing across the country, in various provinces, in various states, in various geographies, with climate change happening, with COVID-like pandemics hitting us, with various variants, and all kinds of complications. The rapidity with which policy making will happen now would even be more surprising, or more jerky for all of us, if I may use that word. So it will be very interesting to know what's the political rhetoric on local, state, federal, or international levels that's going to fang out because of communication research, and how important is communication research. It's not only about how we disseminate a public policy or a particular policy, or how we utilize a policy for obvious benefits by a particular class, by probably the policy makers or the implementers, but also to see how this communication research is going to broad base the policy and take it to the people. Because at the end of everything, it's people who matter. So thank you for your time, and thank you for being with us this evening, Professor Sanjay, with your glorious work experience, and with your varied work experience. I'm sure this will be a very interesting address, and we are all waiting to learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, just interrupt for 1 minute or so to you, because Professor Palita, the Vice Chancellor of Central University Koraput, he joined, perhaps disconnected some technical issues. Some information from his desk. She joined within 5 to 10 seconds for a welcome remarks, sir. Now I'd like to invite Professor Kumar Palita, the in-charge Vice Chancellor of Central University of Koraput, to go for a. Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Just a minute. Hello.
Sir. No, sir. No, no. No, sir.
Just. I think now I am audible.
Yeah. Please, sir. Please, sir, go ahead. Professor Jib, already with us, and Sarudata Panigrai also with us, and he already concluded his
So, extremely all the guests on the dais and all the dignitaries present and all the participants and former Vice Chancellor Tamil Nadu University Professor V. Mohan and Charudata Panigrai and all other distinguished gentlemen. So at the outset, on behalf of the CARD, I welcome you. And the today's topic, that research required for public policy. Here I want to tell you, 2 days back, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has formed a 8-member committee with 78 ministers. The main purpose is that to find that means for everything, for every solution or every problem, there must be requirement of exercise of brain and research. Without research, nothing can be tangible achieved. And as such, we know that in the last 2 to 3 decades, the whole world is undergoing with a lot of change, and knowledge power is dominating, and a lot of digitization, technology-driven things are going on. And a country which is superior in knowledge, superior in technology, and in research, particularly police research, those countries are taking ahead of all other countries. And India being one of the most developing countries and one of the countries which is going to dominate in the coming decades, I think public research is required for public policy. Because without research, without thoroughly investigating things, no policy should be undertaken. We have seen that in the 1952 to onwards, the 5-year plan, how it has been executed, and what is the result. No doubt we have achieved a lot, but perhaps we could have achieved much more. If you see the Western countries and others, particularly Japan and many other, Germany and many other countries, where technology and research has a much more thing, even in America. So we see that for any policy research, for any undertaking any policy, research is utmost requirement. So I think on this condition, CARD is organizing this seminar with such a eminent person who is the former Vice Chancellor of Tamil Nadu Central University. He is our guest today, and I wish that will be illuminated by his talk. And we academicians, wherever we are, we feel that while running any administration or running any project or anything, we require a planning, coordination, execution. But for planning, coordination, and execution, we require a lot of research earlier. Without research, no policy can be fruitful. With these words, again welcoming all the guests present here, I again wish that the program will be successful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your nice words. Now I would like to request Professor B.P. Sanjaya to initiate his talk.
Thank you, distinguished organizers of this conference, director, vice chancellors, and other distinguished people present in the audience or Facebook or any other media. I'm particularly thankful to Jenna for having thought of me to address the distinguished gathering this evening. I have chosen the theme research for communication policy, or as the director also pointed out, it can be vice versa as well. I've deliberately selected communication, not media, because to me, communication subsumes media. And therefore, we always have to look at the broader processes in communication. Jenna, do I have the sharing rights of the screen, please?
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Is this visible?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah. One second. Yeah. Now, as I said, to me or to any scholar working in the area of policy, the important thing is to look at it as within a macro process. Take, for example, if the Center for Adivasi Research intends to engage in a policy analysis. Very often we look at ourselves or the beneficiaries at the tail end of the spectrum. Try for a while reversing that and begin to analyze upwards. Probably many contours of policy making will also be visible. I'm also deliberately infusing communication with a major task. And that major task is in our context, which is, to use the cliche, diverse and also plural. So any attempt to look at policy in a country like ours as a one shoes fits all perspective may not necessarily yield the kind of results or interventions we wish to make. Now, policy studies also tell us that is there a need for having a formative processes in evolving a policy? Or is policy, as it happens in many situations, is it a post facto response? Today we are in a situation where we have students from the Institute of Management in the audience. The array of tools and techniques that are available to us based on assumed principles of data aggregation, etc., are very varied.
Hello. Hmm.
Are you able to hear me, please?
Seminar.
Huh? Hello?
Please continue, sir.
No, is there somebody who wanted to ask a question? Or?
No, sir. No, sir.
Say Bikram Ray.
No, if others mute, then this noise will not
Shubham,
occur.
please mute all.
Yeah, because it
Please, sir, go
echoes
ahead.
it echoes into my ears.
Okay, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So, in the first place, are we looking at ourselves as being in an advantageous position or not? I'll come to that. Now, what has happened is when I said that media is subsumed in communication. Very often, particularly students of communication, and many of us in the past, have always believed in the so-called inherent ability of the media itself to bring about certain kinds of change. At the outset, as a researcher, I would like to contest that. If media is reduced to an agency of transmission, who uses the agency of transmission is important than the charm or the glamour of the media itself. So media research for a very long time in the past, beginning about 1945 or 46. Now, why do we use 1945, 46 or the late 40s as a framework? It is because almost 92 to 114 or 115 countries of the world gained their independence, so-called independence, from a clutch of 7 or 8 major European powers. Now, we also have to recognize that the tools of colonization were rooted in what scholars like Daniel Hedrick and others point out as the tools of empire. Examples abound. But look at the advent of telegraph in India, the advent of railways in India. Quite recently, not many years ago, we had debates and discussions about the so-called First War of Independence. If you notice that the strategic victory of the British in quelling that war was essentially rooted in the telegraph and other mechanisms it had. So students of communication, students of management might at some point in time check some of these analysis, which talks about the advantages colonizers had in communications tools. Now, we also have a post-1945-46 situation, which I mentioned. Because India, like many other countries, justifiably, ambitiously, and true to our aspirations, embarked on its own policies with regard to how it wanted to develop. Now, here we have to look at 2 or 3 strands that were at the basis of their policy. One is students would do well to look at the National Committee for Policy Formation in various sectors, led by Jawaharlal Nehru as early as 1938. Many of the sectors were analyzed, and many of the sectors were also debated. And within this framework, the choice of radio at that particular point in time was limited because, as many scholars have pointed out, the British Empire's perception and use of radio in colonies such as India was not highly patronizing at all. And therefore, while the potential for radio was realized, at least so by this committee, there was a clear-cut understanding that the spread and expansion of radio may not necessarily be commensurate with the requirements. Now, this is where, as a professor who introduced mentioned, what kind of research is used for what kind of argument is crucial. Now, communication and media literature is replete with the origins of mass media usage, particularly in the 2 major conflicts that we had. The multiplier effect and the propaganda dimensions of mass media, where the hallmark of many, many earlier models of communication, including theories of communication. Now, these were not models just to present a visual representation of the process. These were models which were based on a research here and there and translated into what happens when communication, or by extension media, has some kind of content. Now, this had built up a considerable argument on the why is this 1 second? Okay, this side, this icon of the card Odisha is showing up on the end of the slide. Can I remove it? I don't know.
Please, sir, please.
Oh, 1 second, 1 second. Yeah, okay, all right. So the entire experience of so-called decolonization meant two different things to many countries. One was, of course, a direction of imagery that came about, the so-called modernization dynamics. Second was, of course, the classical perception. But the drawback in any country, and even now we use that kind of a framework, is that the difference between people like us and the not so fortunate is only because we somehow are more aware and better informed, and the less unfortunate among us is not so well informed. And therefore, if they only had as much mass media consumptions as we people have, they would level up to our whatever respective situation is. I think I'm sure that many people understand that this is a very naive assumption. Naive assumption, not only then, but perhaps in the present context as well. Now, when I say that this was a very dominant way of thinking, I mean it. I mean it because research report after report emphasized the gaps in information, the lack of awareness as perhaps a major isolated variable, and media as the mass multiplier of such information exchanges. One. Second major difficulty was, what is third world? What is developing country? As I said, 100 countries, 150 countries which gained whatever independence, all in one block. A country like India of subcontinental dimensions, which represents probably, as the cliche once again goes, all the major religions of the world, etc., which has acute levels of disparity, acute and more interesting levels of cultural diversity, as against many other smaller countries where homogenization probably is there. So a policy framework which looks at a broad categorization is problematic, is what I would like to say. Not that it cannot be put in a framework, but it's problematic because by the sheer magnitude of the range of problems that we have, there are issues. Now, this, by the way, has come repeatedly across in decade after decade by the reports of various, not only world bodies, but also national bodies, which have looked at what I would call as the gap between promise and performance. But does it mean that there aren't universals that we should not be worried about? Sure, we should be. Social sector, health, education, malnutrition. Yes, these are near universal concerns. And I don't think we should kind of, push for differences. Of course, there are some theories who also have approaches to what is health, etc. We will not get into that because that would take on a different kind of a discussion altogether. Now, what I meant to also to say was, did research in media and communication embed advocacy? And was that advocacy focused on media centricity? And when you have media centricity, students can check it out. All these are keywords, and you will find at least 3 or 4 major books in each one of these topics. So the situation is that prescriptive and advocacy, born out of research. Now, this is where I would like to bring in the question of what is research? Where is it conducted? What are the contextual niceties of the research conducted there? How do you extrapolate a recommendation from that situation? How do you make that recommendation on a block of countries? That is all research, as my colleagues would bail me out. Essentially, towards the end of the research, we all, like a textbook case, talk about implications of the research for something. It may not be policy, but you will say, what is the implication of the research? What am I contributing towards? So a very, very active advocacy. Now, this is where I would not come to any great kind of a conclusion amongst particularly young students. That these are all processes where in a conference room of a central university or of an institute of management, 5 people sit together and say that let's take developing countries for a ride. No, that's not how it happens. What happens is that they are presented in very, very, what should I say, persuasive manner. They take like years of illiteracy, traditionality. They define our dresses. They define our agriculture. Health, and begin to weave a kind of an analysis. So the nature of advocacy and embedded in all kinds of research, particularly people who want to apply. My only argument is that studying implications of the research that has been given to you is a major policy decision that beneficiaries, receiving institutions, receiving countries have to make. Research is not only about what others have said. Research is also an interrogation of the research that is presented to you. And thereby, you will be in a better position to take the research in its stride. Now, why am I talking about it? I'm talking about this because post 1970s, 1976, 77, all these advocacy and policy oriented research fell flat. Students of social sciences know the argument of Kuhn and the notion of paradigm. How a paradigm can repeat itself in terms of cloning research without necessarily going through the first step of research, which is, what is my question? Why am I doing this research? We all were heavily criticized by UGC and many of our senior professors that the quality of research, the quantity of research is high probably, but the quality of research, many a times, many people have anguished, and it's a challenge to all vice chancellors, directors of institutes of management, as to where and how they would encourage research and what kind of questions are being asked, taken up by the students. So post 75, 80s, the shift in research moved on to, it is not so much about the, what should I say, preoccupation with methodology, samples, statistical tests, etc., which is important for the rigor. I'm not discounting that. But what is the question? What is the question that I need to ask? If my people have a sustained model of livelihood, should I search for upsetting that sustenance and saying that, here, something else is coming, why don't we do this? We walk into that upsetting of the sustenance by our research and we'll have no solution. And after 5 years, 10 years, we say that, oh my goodness, we didn't look at it. But the problem there is somebody at the central government or state government, fortunately or unfortunately, has taken your research and implemented a whole set of institutions in place, and their efficacy will automatically suffer. This happened. Give me examples of agriculture and diffusion studies. Once again, diffusion studies are based on large, very large farm practices. India basically had a very fragmented small holding pattern of agriculture. So the entire set of practices of new ideas, when they are oriented towards particular kinds of technology and particular kind of inputs, they have a problem. Students could read Political Economy of Agriculture and the Green Revolution, which might give them another perspective of what happened then. Then, of course, in communication, we also have the relationship of media to democracy. Now, I don't want to sound political here to say, what is democracy? That's a larger question. I do understand that. But what does democracy mean? Does the aberration of democratic setup in the last elections in the US tell anything about the world's highly regarded democracy, as against the continuous experience of our elections with our democracy? It does not matter. We have sustained democracies to elect whoever comes to power. And that has been accepted by the ruling and the opposition. But the point here is, media's relationship to democracy many a time was based on what I would call it as the Anglo-Saxon principles of democracy. And the democratic setup were very different. So when I had to make a presentation to the parliamentarians, media and democracy, I had to peel off the layers of what we mean by democracy. And that, of course, is something that we also have to discuss. So when somebody says we are in 143, 147, 145th position, 135th position, etc., etc., sometimes it is meaningful. Sometimes to you and me, it really does not make a much of a difference. So one has to recognize that think tanks, watch groups, also conduct research and rank. We also have to, what I'm trying to tell you is that there are different kinds of research which come up with findings. That's something that we need to recognize. What did the old social sciences traditions in India ignore? Except historians, of course. Did they? Can I be very vocal in saying that they ignored colonization? Did they ignore the structures of domination and unequal patterns of economic relationships caused by them or by our own history? Has any evaluation been done of what kinds of aid we received and for what? In parts of Orissa, in different parts. Even now, some of the tea shops have zinc sheets with American milk tin sheds, which came under the PL 480. There are different applications of what came. And then, of course, you have the USA. I'm only trying to take one or two examples. This is not to say that USAID or there are many other agencies. There are European aid agencies, there are French agencies, there are UK, Oxfam. So many other agencies are also there. This is not criticizing. What I'm trying to say is that the kind of implications the studies have should be examined. That's the point as a good researcher that we. Now, a 2017 report of the media industry suddenly talks of media for the masses. Students of communication, what then was our understanding of mass media? Now, one of the professors who taught me, and I'm throwing this open for further discussion and debate, in our classes said that India does not have a mass media. India has a class media. And this was based on newspaper subscription. Even newspaper subscription is not only about money. Newspaper is also about the contents being relevant. What contents of stories of Bhubaneswar have, let us say, to the rest of Orissa state? Or what are the kind of stories that a journalist like P. Sainath writes with research on the plight of many deprived situations, including some parts of Orissa or other situations? What are the kind of stories that they are talking about? And I think that the field documentation sometimes also tells us, let it be stories on farmers' suicide. Let it be stories of, other kinds of exploitation. People often dismiss journalistic and say that it is not research-based. No, I'd like to beg to differ. A field-based observation may require research of an empirical kind, as one of the professors pointed out, evidence-based, as he also mentioned, of a scale and magnitude that allows us to see, well, maybe it's an isolated incident. Yes, you are free to say that. But aggregate statistics available with the Human Rights Commission or the Farmers' Body do indicate the continuation of that particular phenomenon. So In mass media, in mass communication, many a time, compilation of stories also become the focal point of carrying out research, because observations based on field at times also might allow us to ask important questions. Now, what did we do in the 80s, for example? An International Commission on Communication, many of you know, McBride Commission, as late as 1980s, talked about structures of communication as also being equally important. It is not that I have my own news agency that is important. They talked about the 5 global news agencies that determine the content of 75 to 80% of newspaper content, because you would notice that many newspapers have similar content and they all come from a few agencies. And that, they say, is related to the historical structure of the news agencies. The whole concept of a world new order, etc., came from that. While that was with regard to communication and media, more recent examples are also there, where, for example, telecommunication was posited as a missing link. Today, India stands on the threshold of celebratory approaches to digital India. It's something that is very often mentioned. And in digital India, if you see the documents, there are here and there references of inclusivity, incorporation, etc. Now, somewhere in my talk, I mentioned that if you were to start upwards from the Center for Adivasi Studies and reverse the articulation of who they are and what kind of information and what kind of media and what kind of intervention they would like to make, you might have a policy orientation as if people matter, not as if institutions matter. And that's something that research also talks about. Fine, fair enough. Is technology neutral? Today is the era of innovation, communication technology, ICTs, etc., etc. The moot question that a communication researcher asks is, what is this technology? What is internet? What kind of sources does it show up when I search? And what are the relevance of those sources? They're articulate, they're nice. That is one aspect. Second aspect is the structures that adopt the technology. Who has adopted it? Is it the banking technology, tech sector? Is it the retail chain? If the retail chain adopts a particular technology, or a big person adopts a technology, what happens to the retail and small traders? I mean, this example may not necessarily fit into communication, but that's something that we also need to look at. Has the existing patterns of political, social relationships changed as a result of all the glorious things that have happened in our media? I don't know. I would like to take questions from the audience. People talk about digital divide in many researchers. Is it only about access? Or are we talking about attitude? Are we talking about territorialization of groups? Are we talking about ability of the people? Knowledge societies and research on knowledge societies also talk about skill set gaps and optimum utility as well. So, as I said, in the past, people have said that was communication research a response to the industrializing society of the West? Much of such research was what we called as administrative and, say, in social sciences, or particularly communication studies. In the 1983-84, there was a massive debate among Asian, European, and North American scholars on what they described as a ferment in the field. And that ferment in the field was based on whether the loose nature of communication and media studies is a problem. That was the first question they asked. What is the disciplinary nature of the subject that we need to look at? Second question they asked was, are we looking at administrative research? We use the term efficiency of delivery, efficiency of information. So many of the media studies are in the administrative mode. That means we are looking at agencies and institutions and seeing how media can help them. Many of my colleagues who are working in community media, communitarian media, some of my scholar friends here know them, have reversed the question. Community radio, for example. The whole aspect of research was born out of a Supreme Court judgment for a commercial reason, that airwaves are public property and not necessarily the property of the state. This public and state distinction has been a major source of policy studies all over the world. So that judgment given for a cricket board became the hallmark that if airwaves are to be public, all the stakeholders of the public should have access to the airwaves. We might question the efficiency of the community radio policy in India, but if 330 community radio stations exist in whatever form they exist, some justification of community of the community, by the community, for the community exists. So that is something that we also need to. So advocacy research can also result in policy options. Now, we also had the major historical experiment called SITE, which was also in Orissa. And that's something that I have worked on, not necessarily as a field researcher in Karnataka, but I also developed my major dissertation on transfer of communication technology. I have examined the whole set of policy dimensions of what happened in the US before it developed its satellites, and what was the reason for the US to look for markets, look for countries. And India was a major country for the US. Russians were interested, but they came in late. So the SITE experiment is just not about teacher in the sky. It's also about a whole set of relationships involving Sarabhai and a host of other research. Maybe in questions, if there are specific things, I'll take about it. Now, public opinion polls, you also have a problem. For example, the faith in social media was completely uprooted by what happened with Cambridge Analytica. Deep profiling. We are giving up voluntarily our information about ourselves so somebody else can do social engineering about ourselves, us. We have seen elections after elections in different countries being victim to this kind of analytics-based, including India, for example. There have been criticisms in the parliament. So communication is not about only celebrity of the ecosystem that we have. It has consequences for them. It has consequences for people. And that's something that research and the question should always raise. So this is something that we need to examine. And I've already talked about advocacy research. And guess we have who can do policy research. Definitely people like you and me can do. People say that where is the money? Critical thinking sometimes may not require the kind of huge money. We are always driven by this STEM philosophy. Millions of dollars they get, we don't get anything. I think social scientists should move away from this kind of no research funds, no. With your own pocket money of 5,000 research, you can do interrogative research on the community you live in and see what is the implications of somebody else's policy on you. It doesn't require a huge amount of money. It doesn't. So this comparison institutions to make, physics got so much. Are Baba, capital intensive labs have a different kind of an approach. So we have to recognize, I don't want researchers to wallow in self-empathy to do quality research. They can do it. We have done it in past. Think tanks. You have, for example, the Observer Research Foundation does research on many important aspects. They do policies with regard to India-China relations. They have done recent research, policy research on digital India, and so on. They are think tanks. Now, people might say think tanks have an objective, have a goal. Fair enough. They do have goal. But what my argument is that policy research can stem from an intersection of interest groups. It can be biased in favor of the group that you wish to represent. As I said, in this particular case, for example, let us say the Adivasi group. It can happen. What is the political economy, which is one of the important aspects of policy? It looks at hidden power relationships. Who is making the policy? Whoever thought that of the 20 or 80 telecom companies we had in the past at 1 rupee, 150 SMS, today we are left with 3 telecommunication companies. Is it a policy outcome? Is it a conglomeration of the market? We don't know. I look for answers from you. So research can also talk about who is represented. For example, there is a large body of literature on inclusivity, exclusivity, issues of access, whose stories get, if a Sushant Singh Rajput story goes on for 6 months at the expense of many great important stories. No offense meant to Sushant Singh Rajput, but there are many other stories. People are dying. Migrant workers are not able to reach home. Where is the focus? Diversity of ownership, not me. The government of India, TRAI, Telecommunications Regulatory Body, has talked about how in media, in India, the concentration of media is affecting the public sphere. And that's something that we also have to look at. These are some of the approaches we can take. Very often, we are often labeled that this is another problem in academia. The moment you talk about who is doing what, this leftist, rightist, centrist comes. And what we are doing is we are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. A Marxian approach or a centrist approach or even a highly intensive capital approach is taken for interrogating in the kind of questions and the kind of evidence you want to mount. Oh, you're talking about corporation, then probably it has to come from some university. No, I think policy research also looks at a set of stakeholders, and that stakeholders may have a power equation. Thank you very much. I'm open to questions now. Thank you so much.
Now I would like to request Professor B.C. Das to go for a quick comment, please. Then we'll go for another session called question answer.
Can I move out from my sharing screen or?
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
No, I don't know. You will have to.
No, it's okay, sir. Sir, you are the boss for now, sir.
Okay, fine. I might use it for my answers.
Okay.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Professor B.C. Das. Can you hear me, sir? Hello. Professor B.C. Das.
Hello, Dr. Jana. Professor B.C. Das is not in the meeting.
No, he is in the meeting.
He messaging me
Okay.
that he's busy with some another work.
Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightenings and very cumulative ideas said on particular this policy research and media advocacy, media pedagogy, and all this very warm and very charming and interesting information said by you. Now I'd like to invite questions from the audience side. First of all, I would like to share some of my major interaction with you related to this, although I was a student of communication. Sir, tell me frankly, when you said some of your ideas in terms of Odisha, a student like me and student like me, any other states, how would you able to listen lectures when we were in classrooms? We never know what actual media advocacy means. We never thought about what research, communication research is meant for policy. And also we are always combined forces how to deal with research and what kind of research we are conducting for a good job or quote unquote these marketing oriented, what you call it, the corporate phenomena. Maximum numbers of students there might be pretty sure after completion of this post-graduation in journalism and mass communication, they will probably get a job in media sector or in PR sector or in corporate sector or in any NGOs, particular NGOs. But we never listen any kind of lecture from your I can tell you wholeheartedly, sir. What kind of your suggestion for these students like me? Those are indebted with some kind of knowledge society or in terms of moral society or what you call it, the ethical society we are living in, particular these days. When you rightly mentioned about this core area in terms of historical ideas of narration 1947 to 1960, then after 1970, then one era began about after Madam Gandhi's emerging India, then 75 to 77 the emerging part, then after 80s, then 80 to 85 and 90, then after 91 and this liberalization LPG model imposed on us in terms of this glamorized world, what we first time seen in the big convents or big censorship of this mass media is prominently stuck on these distinct ideas about honors. Then after immediately we have told that 2000 something blah 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 and this computerization came and something happened with us and this virus came out in 2020, this pandemic. What next? And you rightly mentioned about ICT and particular this information, the world of jargonical world, the grammarly world, and these when we are working on this hybrid language era, this language those languages imposed on these communities is concerned. You rightly mentioned, if I'm not wrong, if I quote here Habermas theory from community or content, which is more important. You rightly pointed out institution is more important rather. Sorry, this research is more important rather than not institution here. Sir, what is your suggestions for student like me? And what kind of research we deal with, particularly in 21st century's phenomena? You have a quite little bit understanding in terms of a great institution maker of India. When the third line central universities came, you are taking the charge of a state called Tamil Nadu. And then you did your PhD in abroad, the most promising university of Canada. Here is India. What lack in research? When you are going to deal with the research, the phenomena always, the ideas always related to this piece of paper. When we are going to do a PhD, I mean, I always say it's a piece of paper, not exactly we do research. We have always a theoretical constraint, some primary or some secondary. And maximum numbers of Indian research, with due respect to all the audiences of our global audiences here who are watching us, this holistic approach of the research is called quote unquote copy paste methodology. Copy something, paste here, copy something other and paste here, then copy somebody's idea and code here without referencing. That is the best research as per concern. Sir, what is your suggestion for us?
See, you have raised a number of observations, and I'm not very sure whether I'll be in a position to deal with all of that. But the important thing here is two aspects that you have raised. Teaching of communication and media studies, particularly in different states and probably also research, has to take on a kind of what should I say, build in certain ideas of what you're taking from research and incorporate that into various subjects that you deal. If you're dealing with journalism, look at the content, or if somebody is doing content analysis, let it not be only content analysis. Content analysis with regard to what? You are not celebrating the methodology there. You are asking questions about the content in the newspaper or media with respect to what is your ultimate economic or political or social objective. So you're right. We kind of, take an idea and say that development news is not given priority in media. So I want to find out the extent of development news. And you spend 6 months, 1 year, PhD, etc., measuring, etc., and say 21% only was given or 2% only given. Doesn't help. It's not a question of methodology here. As I said in my presentation, unless your basic question is critical, basic question is of profound importance, any research that follows will only be celebration of the methodology and not necessarily its implication. Point number one. Point number two, we have various theories, models, etc. in our syllabus. Have we ever stepped back, at least in the number of classes that we have? Let us examine. Let us put the source message channel receiver model. It's not a question in the examination that what is SMCR. No. Can we analyze what is the research talking about, who the sources of information are in our country? Why don't we use that to teach a model? What is preventing? It is not a question of where you go and where do you study, Professor. What is important here is, as teachers, unless we study by which I mean ask questions, relate it, take those examples, cite research, take the research findings, use it, and explain. Students will never be sensitive to critical thinking at all. And then at the end of 2 years, we blame ourselves, blame the system, and say, oh, they are doing, as you said, cut copy. In the absence of original thinking, critical thinking from the classrooms, what will a poor student do? His only access is a Wikipedia. His only access is, ask me why. I think there you have to be very cautious. Give them a set of readings. The readings may not be very profound. It might come from a great intellectual from Orissa. It might be Oriya language. Give it to them for reading. They understand that. Let them ask questions. And then probably we will be doing a great service. It's not a question of which university we come from. What is important? What is it that we do in our classes to sensitize the students? If we don't do that, I think we'll continue to talk about Western models and so on and so on. Thank you. Any other questions, please?
Thank you so much, sir. Now I'd like to request Dr. Shravan to ask question direct to sir.
Thank you so much. Hello.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, and a very good evening to one and all. Of course, it's always privilege and pleasure to hear Honorable Vice Chancellor Sanjay sir. And at the outset, also thank you so much, sir, for unfolding several myths and various dimensions of this media and communication. Sir, you have rightly mentioned that media should not be simply seen as a means of information. Rather, it has to be holistically viewed and viewed as a tool of empowerment. It's absolutely correct. And you have also said, sir, about the role of media in democracy and vis-a-vis. And you also highlighted the implication of research, which is, of course, very important as far as a country like India is concerned, and when we are, promoting the concept of research. So my question is that, given this whole deliberation, do you think, sir, that with the passage of time and the incident that has happened over a period of last, let's say, 5 or 4 years, there has been an excessive stretch and scope, rather I would say expanding scope in the field of media in different forms. And this has diluted the very purpose of communication. How do you buy this idea, sir? This is one. And second one is that, do you think there is a space where it is now high time that we should put some check and balance, and some sort of monitoring mechanism has to be there, which will do all these kind of monitoring and stringent vigilance activity, monitoring the the circulation of biased information, which is really creating a sort of threat to the national integrity and sovereignty. How do you think, sir?
Yeah. The first question of expansion that you talked about, we have to be very cautious in being overjoyous about expansion. Expansion is the intensity of media channels available to the people. Expansion is not necessarily the diversity and plurality of content to many people. It doesn't happen that way. It has not happened, at least in our case situation. So more and more of the same content in 150 different channels of availability on your WhatsApp, on your social media, in your Instagram, in your Facebook. Many a time it's a kind of a replicate to see yourself, finding out the same content from your friends and other things every day of the time. So I'm not here to kind of, argue that the media has expanded. Media has expanded, but the content, has it expanded to reflect the kind of demography that we have? It has not. That's answer number one. Second is you talked about mechanisms control. Now here we have to separate. Many often we are, I think, confusing institutional aspects of journalism with public expression and circulation of ideas. It is the public circulation and expression of ideas which many a time, as you pointed out, might have gone haywire, and state many a time intervenes by shutdowns, internet shutdowns, things like that, etc., etc. But has journalism improved, or has journalism become more problematic? I think that is where we have to ask. Each one of you now should think, are the sources of media that I'm accessing giving me a kind of a journalistic interpretation of what's happening around me? If it is not, then expansion of media is not correlated, A, with diversity. Expansion of media is not correlated with better journalistic practices. Let me give you an example. I mentioned that in my slides. As the media has expanded in India, the concern for its freedom and independence is coming down. It is coming down drastically. So we have to now recognize that it's not so much of who is starting a newspaper. Why are they starting a newspaper? Many of the TV channels are not making money at all, but they are news channels. Why are they? Whose views are they propagating? In a state like Tamil Nadu, if you have 9 out of 10 channels controlled by political party, one political party or the other, where is this question of public sphere, public space, democracy? Whose views are you listening? We don't know. As citizens, we have to interrogate. And as students of communication, you have to ask this question and see what you are getting out of the media. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, sir. Here is one question from Question Dex. Free and fair flow of communication. When media houses become the mouthpiece of government, political parties and corporate houses in liberal democracies, and its propaganda machinery even in times of crisis. Your observation, sir. This is the question.
See, I think the question also has certain built-in assumptions. If, for example, the media is not giving free and fair, as the question suggests, then how can we call ourselves as liberal democracy? We are not. In the first place, our democracy itself may not be as liberal as we think we are. Who knows? That's a debatable point. 2, you're already recognizing that they are becoming mouthpieces of, as the questionnaire says, government, political parties, and corporate houses. This is what I talked about in a particular slide. It is not me saying this. The Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of India, in its paper on media ownership, has talked about it. So policy has to necessarily recognize what are the dangers of absolute control in any one entity to democracy. That question should be asked by citizens group, by regulators, and by academics, and many others. And that is something, it is not a question of what can we do about it. We have to constantly do research to see where the agenda is not necessarily reflecting of the consequences that these policies are having on us. That's very important. let it be displacement, let it be forest land reforms, let it be mining, all these issues. I'm sure that people in Orissa have been constantly looking at some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. One more question from Shubham Das. Sir, how you relate post-truth social order and this media phenomenon in particular?
Post-truth.
Post-truth.
Now, does the person says that truth has gone and we are living nowhere, anywhere in the truth? Is that what the implication of the person is? If that is the case, then historically and always, truth is always a gray area of whose version we are recognizing as true. For example, in movie studies, we have an effect called the Roshaman Effect. Many of you might have known this. One incident, 4 interpretations. So the question of truth itself is a subject matter of where it is coming from and what kind of interpretation it is bringing. So that is something that we have to examine. And talking about how do you look at the impact of to protect nature, culture. Is there media activism at all in the recent past? I don't think in the recent past we have had media activism of the kind that is being referred to. Except, of course, I said works of very important journalists, like, for example, Sainath, who has done a lot of work in your state as well. That is something that we have to look at. On the cultural aspect, there are concerns as to whether identity of the disadvantaged sections has become marginalized. But here, some theorists argue that probably social media has got a kind of a mechanism to try and address and coalesce the identities of different groups. I mean, it is to be studied, and I'm sure that people like you can study it more. So they are looking at, for example, Castells and others have argued that in network societies, dissidence can be more pronounced. They also give examples of the Amazon forest riots. They give examples of the Arab Springs, etc., etc. And also, as the previous questioner asked, what is post-truth, post-Trump, etc., is something that we need to look into as well. Thank you. Any other question?
Thank you so much, sir, for your all the answers, giving a beautiful sense of thinking and realizing all these scenario of these contemporary realities. Now I'd like to request Dr. Shravan to go for the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Bikram sir. Now, it's time to end the session in a formal setup. But as we all know that it was a really wonderful session of Professor Sanjay. When I say it is end, it is not exactly end. Rather, he has unfolded and has shown a new direction to all of us who are like-minded and who are committed to the society. And as rightly said by Professor Sanjay, our responsibility as a citizen, and in fact, I would say as a committed citizen, as a conscious citizen. So, taking this as a note, I once again formally express my deep sense of gratitude on behalf of CARD and all our partnering institutions to our professor and who has been the keynote speaker for this deliberation, to unfold and enlighten all the participants who are here through different media platform, giving a very sharp, I would say, and very solid statement that media should be viewed as a tool of empowerment. And it is high time that we have to see research from an implication perspective, from a very practical perspective. And as we all listen to the discourse, that we have to get out of that practice of copy paste, and we have to really think how this whole lot of research media contributes to the developmental process, reaching to the unreached. Thank you so much, Professor Sanjay, for enlightening us, taking your time from busy schedule. Although we are not interested to leave you, rather we would continue to listen you and will seek your guidance and your advice from time to time. As sir, you must be knowing that CARD is committed to this developmental practice by being in the field with the people, with the community. So thank you so much, sir, for your valuable time and insight. We would continue to seek your advice and guidance in the days to come, steering the entire process of deliberation that we are planning, and we are also in a process of disseminating the various learnings that we are getting from you or people like you. Thank you so much. Now, I would also like to thank all our partnering institutions, starting from IIM Sambalpur, Central University of Koraput, and Ravenshaw University, who has been very much instrumental and have been keen to partner with CARD. They have appreciated and they have buy our idea. And thank you so much to all our mentors, our advisors, our well-wishers, who have been there right from the day one to take this gigantic task that we are doing last from several months, which is a very unique initiative to unfold several things related to community, media, and the mainstream developmental process. And thank you so much, all the partnering institutions, our advisors, our guide, who has been instrumental in shaping the entire deliberation. I would also take this opportunity to the most important aspect of this entire deliberation, that is our participants, without whom this whole lot of discourse is meaningless. So thank you so much, all the participants, the learned participants across the globe who are joining or who have joined us in this entire deliberation over a period of time, for their patience listening and active participation. We will continue to seek your participation, your suggestion, and of course your feedback, how CARD can come up with some kind of document, literature, and of course being in the community, being in the field, to continue it, render its service without any selfless interest to the last man of this community. So with this hope, I think for the day it is time to say goodbye, but with a hope that tomorrow again we will come up with a new set of deliberation with another enlightened person of our contemporary society, and we'll continue this journey of development. Thank you so much. Have a nice time and good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, and looking forward for your guidance and cooperation with future engagement also, sir. Namaste, sir.
Thank you. Namaste.